Now, we have now about 30 minutes left, woohoo, where I am going to be taking your questions live. So if you haven't already, there is still time for you to submit your questions in. And if I can encourage you to send your questions a little bit more, I would say that to 2 people that have sent in questions today, you are going to get some pretty cool prizes. If you are a non-Match member, you will win 6 months membership at Match, which is a fantastic time to try out all of the skills that you've learned today. If you are already a Match member, you're going to get access to my premium home study course for dating, Unite. So we got our first question in already, which is, if you find a woman attractive, but her dating profile has very little information. Aha, we've covered this. This is great. What is a good first message to find out more about her? So I'm really pleased that someone sent this message in because I feel like vindicated. I was like, okay, point 1 today was, of course, the importance of completing your profile, because you really want people who are sincerely motivated to get to know you better. You want to be able to provide them with some platforms or some cues about some stuff that they can talk to and engage with you about. It also, of course, gives you a really good way of filtering out who's taking the time and care to read your profile. So if someone's got very little information, you could say something like, so can you tell me something I would never have guessed about you from your profile? So you can even say something before this, which is a little playful comment like, very mysterious profile, wink. So what can you tell me about yourself that I wouldn't have guessed from your profile? So by sending a message like that, you are acknowledging the fact that the profile just doesn't have that much information on it. And you're also still setting the question up like that you're specifically looking out for particular qualities in the people that you're messaging. It's sort of like, show me a little bit of what you've got here and we're going to see if we can keep messaging. So that can be a really good way to start to open up. The other route you could go down is, of course, looking at people's photos and using those assumptions that I spoke about earlier, which are guesses, in order to build out messages from that. So it could be looking at the background of someone's photos and saying something like, looks like, I could be wrong, but it looks like you're a sucker for this, or it looks like you're really big into that. And again, that attention to detail can be a really good way of beginning to form a conversation when someone hasn't quite completed their profile. So our next question is, how do you keep someone interested longer term when there is some vast distance between yourself and you've been trading all the usual Q&A? So I think this is something that's happening a lot at the moment. Of course, we're living in some funny times where sometimes meeting up with people is more complicated than it had been a year ago. And I think learning how to negotiate that and remembering that just because our external circumstances are a little bit tricky, that doesn't mean that you can't date or that dating is off the cards for you. Instead, though, we want to really look at strategies so that you can keep feeling really good in your dating life. So the first thing I would think about with this is, remember, it isn't actually all on you to keep the other person interested. Remember, dating is that two-way process. You can only build a bridge from 2 sides. So instead of feeling this pressure like, oh gosh, I'm worried about losing their interest, how do I keep their interest going? You have to think, well, actually, if this person is as motivated and as willing as I am to build a genuine relationship, they also should be making an effort to get to know me. If you have defaulted into all of the usual Q&A, as you said, a good way to maintain contact over a longer stretch of time where you may not necessarily have too many options to actually meet is to remember that intermittent yet impactful messaging often works better. So in layman's terms, what that means is, instead of sending the, hey, how's it going message every day for forever, instead of sending that, it possibly could be better to maybe have 1 video date a week, or to send a little voice note, or to send a video of yourself, or to send a song that you're really into at the moment. So these more multimedia and engaging ways of messaging with someone means that the messaging doesn't get predictable and therefore becomes a little bit more exciting. Because what you really want is that, of course, when someone does receive a message from you and their screen lights up, you want them to feel like pleasantly surprised to have received that message. So remember, building a connection is a two-way street, and focus on intermittent yet impactful contact and communication. So the next question here. What's the best approach to finding out about a person's true life goals without sounding or seeming like a job interviewer? So this can be tricky, can't it, on our dates when we're trying to talk to someone about how we think and feel and we really want to get to know them. It can be a default to slip into interviewer mode, which is where you start asking questions like, oh, so what do you do? When did you start that? What did you study in order to start that? And you'll find that the more questions you string together, the narrower and more constricted the conversation starts to feel. So how we really breathe life into a conversation is we have to balance what questions we ask of someone else with also offering and suggesting statements and pieces of information about ourselves. So if you want to find out, for instance, about what motivates someone in their job, you can both ask a really broad question, which gives them a lot of space to give you a really detailed answer. So instead of asking, how long have you worked there? You would probably want to ask, what was there one day that you decided that's what you wanted to do? Because what you're really looking for there is for them to share a really nicely detailed anecdote of how they think and feel about something. You can also help someone to feel more ready to do that by sharing information about yourself. Because remember, in conversation, there's a really strong power of reciprocation that happens, which means if you share information about yourself, you're going to find that the other person feels like they should probably share roughly the same level of information. So you might want to really focus on talking about what motivated you to start your career, what passions you have in life, and say it in a way that still inquires about what the other person is like and if they're similar or dissimilar to you. So remember to keep sharing that information and keep asking really broad questions to avoid going into interviewer mode. So, how can a dating coach help in online dating? Should I, as a man, get a male or a female coach? This is a good question. So I think that having a great dating coach or having a good coach, regardless of whether we're talking about dating or personal training or business, you don't need to have a coach that's had exactly the same life experience as you. You need to have a coach that really understands where you're coming from, that asks the right questions, that yes, that you can identify with and you find it easy to talk to in some way. But the best coach isn't like, wow, you know, this person's had exactly the dating life I want, I'm going to copy that. Because it's not about us as coaches, it's actually about how we enable you to feel really good and confident and motivated about yourself. So it's really just a way to bolster who you are. So it's not a man-woman thing. It's actually about how does this coach relate to you and how do they help you to progress towards your goals. So the next question is, how much information in my personal life I should add in my profile? What are most interesting things to add? So I get this sort of variations on this question quite a lot. And another variation on it, I guess, is like, you know, what topics should I talk about on a first date? You know, what are good topics and what are not so good topics? So whilst, you know, you might argue that talking about travel or talking about dating is more exciting than talking about work, really the topic isn't as important as how you write about it. So you can have, honestly, quite banal details of your life that you could be talking about eating a cheese toastie and watching Making a Murderer, but you can make that really exciting through how you write it. So just like I mentioned in our profile section, a really good way to get to that is you want to give specific details instead of general statements. So instead of saying, I like travel, you want to share the place that you loved visiting the most. Instead of saying, you know, I like staying in, tell us a little bit about what your ideal cozy night in is. And when it comes to your personal life, remember, we want to really share your values as a person. We want it to feel like on your profile that you're actually speaking to one person. So write your profile like you're addressing it to just that one person that you really, really want to connect with. And as I mentioned in the first section of this coaching session, if you're struggling to find that way of writing things, often it can be really valuable to say it and dictate it, and that will often give you actually a much better insight into your profile and will make it far more original and unique. So I'm just checking, seeing if we've got any other questions that are coming through today. I know that we've had a lot coming through, but we've been, oh, here we go. How do you initiate the conversation when you are a very shy person? Well, I would like to say I think shyness can sometimes be a superpower. So remember, this may surprise you, but I actually consider myself to be quite a shy person myself. And you might be thinking, how can you be sitting there doing a broadcast like this if you're shy? You're not really shy. And the thing is, you can be shy, but you cannot let that shyness limit you. Just because you feel shy, it doesn't mean that you can't initiate a message, or that you can't say hello to someone, or that you can't get up and speak in public. You are really capable of doing those things. So try and detach in your mind the idea that shyness means I can't. There's actually lots of amazing benefits as well to being more traditionally shy, in that you may be better one-on-one. You're probably a really good listener. You may not rush in with an opinion. Like, all of these things are actually really powerful. And when it comes to sending the first message, remember, it's not that you're there sort of like knocking on someone's door and saying, please don't reject me. So get out of that frame of mind where you're putting yourself up or putting yourself forward for someone to reject you if you send the first message, because dating is a two-way street. That means that whilst you want to be able to initiate and you really want to be able to send those first messages, you also need the other person to co-create that interaction with you by being open, by being receptive, by being able to share information about themselves. So it's also super, super important that when you send that first message, make sure the intention is, I'm curious about this person, their profile looks pretty interesting, and if they're not that responsive, I'm not going to assume that like there's something wrong with me, or you know, that they've just got thought next. Instead, that could actually be a signal about how they're approaching dating generally. And I really want someone who's as open to dating as I am, is as enthusiastic and willing to talk to me as I am to them. So next question. How to convey emotion in your profile so women can feel what it would be like to date you? Now I like this question. So when it comes to conveying emotion, a lot of that, again, it's going to go back to, it's not about sharing facts about your life. It's instead much about how you choose to express things. So going back to what we spoke about in that very first section, instead of choosing to state things about yourself, like I'm a fun person, you instead want to really imply that through what anecdotes you share about your life. So think about your profile. Yes, we want to get some key information over in terms of like your hobbies and interests, your passions, your professional life, but we also really want to be clever at sharing anecdotes about your life which demonstrate personal qualities. So think about what emotion you want your profile to convey. If the emotion you want to convey is like dashing, you'd want to be able to say, if we were not, you might write something like, if we were living in C19 times, I'd be the first person to say to pack your suitcase and whisk you off for a weekend somewhere. So do you notice there how I'm not writing that profile or suggesting you write that profile generally? Again, it's written like you're just talking to one person. You're using anecdotes, you're using creative ways of phrasing things to get your point across and allow you to stand out from everybody else potentially on that platform. So how to stay cool and not let emotions based on hope and fantasy lead you. I'd like to also say this person who sent this question in put how to stay cool in inverted commas. And I think that's really is another important part of the dating process, especially for your motivation as well. If you find that you tend to wear your heart on your sleeve and you often build up a lot of expectations about the person you've just met, only to feel disappointed when they're not actually quite as awesome as you thought they were, then what we really need to do is learn how to take a step back throughout that dating process. So we really want to do that. We want to put the brakes on having quite so much expectation. In order to do that, you can often say some phrases to yourself which can help to remind you to actually stay in the present. Because dating, like many aspects of our lives, It can make us want to go into the past, where we start to think about situations that maybe haven't worked out or regrets that we have, or it can make us want to go into the future, where we want to start to imagine, what's it going to be like when we do this? Will we spend Christmas together? And our minds can really take us out of the present moment. So instead, if you do tend to get a little bit carried away with things, the way to remain cool is just to remain in the present. So you can say something like, you know what, they seem really good right now, I'm just going to get to know them. So instead of going off into fantasy land, when you notice your mind wandering, you bring yourself right back to the present moment with a statement like that to remember that you're in a process of getting to know someone, and you really need to reveal more of the map of getting to know them before you can know how good a fit they are for you. Okay, so next question that's been sent in. How open-minded should a person be when it comes to physical attraction when viewing profiles online? Now, I'm actually a big fan of open-mindedness in dating, and there's a good reason for that. I think sometimes we can have an idea about who we think we should date, and that idea is theoretical, right? It's like a hypothesis. We don't know because we haven't necessarily met that person yet. So sometimes when we get very stuck on an idea, we can be like, this person must have, and whether that's a certain level of education or a certain hair color, we can find ourselves really narrowing our field of vision, and it's almost like we're trying to choose a partner, like we're trying to choose something at the supermarket. And really, attraction and connection is a lot bigger than that. So I think you're not I wouldn't say that when you look at a profile, you shouldn't be like, oh no, but you don't need to necessarily think, wow, this person is so amazing. You can think they're quite nice, or could be quite nice, could be okay. Because you may be surprised that when you actually start to speak to a person, or again, you're physically in their presence, you get a bit of sense of their body language, maybe their touch. We're going to get so many more ways to understand how someone could be attractive to us. So I would suggest remaining cautiously open-minded here, connecting with a good amount of people, and then really paying attention to how you feel in their company and how willing they are to build that relationship with you. So next question. How do you start a conversation with a girl who has not yet added a description to her profile? Well, I feel extra vindicated now, because that has now been, I think, the second question of the evening around how to message someone when they do not have a complete profile. So I hope I made my point here. I think it's so important for everybody out there to make sure you have a full and complete profile. And also, if you're thinking about messaging people, you may want to consider prioritizing people who have put that effort into putting their profile together, because again, this could indicate that that person is more invested in the whole process of dating. And remember, it's not that sort of knock on a door, how do I impress them philosophy you want to take into dating. Instead, you really want to look for someone who's as ready as you are to build that connection. So just like I mentioned earlier, you can probably work around this either by looking at her pictures and seeing if there's a guess you can make or a line of conversation that comes up from them. Maybe it's you notice her doing kind of like some yoga and you say, hey, I like that you're into yoga, but could I convince you to try surfing? So you can pick up on a detail from her pictures, or you can request some information from her. So you can say something like, nice and mysterious profile there, wink. Anything you can tell me about yourself that I wouldn't have guessed from your profile. So this sort of puts the ball in her court, really, where she now, even if she didn't quite complete the profile, she now really has to sort of turn up to the table by bringing some information for you, and has to actually be able to say something unique and interesting about herself. And your mindset really should be that even if you think her profile is super cute, if she isn't bringing that investment to the table in terms of she's not messaging you in a way that's interesting and she's not being very open about her life, that should really be a bit of a red flag there for you, because there's probably lots of women that you can find attractive online, but you do need someone that you find attractive and tries as hard as you do to build that connection. So we've got, oh, this is quite an interesting one. Got another question that's come in saying, I'm having a first date for a match this weekend. Oh, it's like, I always want to be like, oh, tell me how that goes. What should I be asking the guy, or what should I talk about? Thanks. Okay, so I want you to remember that when you're going into that first date, remember this isn't an interview, this isn't a space for you to be judged. This is a two-way process. So your goal should really be for yourself. You should be thinking, how can I communicate what I'm into and how I'm about really clearly? That could mean that you are conscious to turn up for that date, feeling nice and relaxed as far as is possible, in order to let your natural personality come through. Because it's not really about impressing someone else. It's about finding someone who, you could be hanging out on a Sunday with in your PJs, who's going to really get on with you and who's going to really accept you. And in order to do that, you have to show who you really are. So sometimes just taking things to be relaxed can be helpful. So that means, not being in a rush to get on that date, maybe spending some time to have a nice bath or something. Do what you can to be relaxed. And also remember your mindset here is that I'm going to express myself really genuinely. I'm also going to be curious about this guy. I'm going to ask him questions but that allow him to express his personality. So rather than going through those standard sort of like small talk questions of the how are you, or what have you been up to this week, how's the quarantine going, instead of going down the small talk line, try to think about what values are really important to you. So if, for instance, family is super, super important to you and you're really close to your immediate relatives, you could choose to talk about how well you get on with them, and then you can ask a question along the lines of discovering how he feels about family. So you're really looking at this as an opportunity to discover and explore his values, and you're looking at it as an opportunity to express who you really are. And there may be a match or there might not be, but if you do those two things, it really helps you to get to that piece of information. And remember, it isn't necessarily about you wooing someone or presenting your best self and making someone like you. That liking should be a really organic reaction to you being able to express who you are really clearly. So another kind of question about how much we should share. So how much would you share about your personal life and relationships on a first date? If someone asks too many personal questions too soon, how to politely decline? I'd like to say I've got a cheeky line for this, because I think sometimes, whilst we want to be open with people, I think it's also very normal that it can take some time to build our trust with another person. And if this is your first date with someone, it might feel a bit unnatural for you to go into that date feeling like a really open book. So instead, if you feel like, that's, I might be open to answering that maybe on date 4, but that feels a bit personal right now, a good thing that you can say is you can say, I think that's more of a date 5 question. And when you say something like that, you're also kind of cheekily hinting that you may be open to more dates, but you're also putting a bit of a roadblock up there to that line of conversation. And of course, when you do put a boundary up towards the conversation, you want someone to demonstrate that they've really listened, heard, and respected that boundary and are not going to keep pushing when you may not feel necessarily super comfortable. When it comes to how much you should share, of course, that comes down to how much you would feel comfortable. All I would suggest doing is to remember that getting to know someone is a real process and it is a journey. It's not something that's going to be able to be covered in one date. And whilst it can feel very romantic and very intense when you suddenly talk in that very personal and full-on way, actually there's something really nice about having a bit more of a snail-like pace towards building that dating experience. So I think you can be careful about how much you feel comfortable with sharing and strike that balance between being open enough about communicating your values and also signaling in the conversation where actually, let's leave that for another time. Also on a first date, you might want to consider doing a first date where you can do some form of activity together, even if it's as simple as taking a stroll through the park or doing a bike ride, because again, you can then be really in the present moment and really focus on getting to know one another without necessarily having to give tons and tons and tons of details on your whole life story just yet, because that's going to be something you're going to develop and build and connect over time. So it has been absolutely amazing talking to you tonight. I really hope that my tips have helped and that you're going to go away and supercharge your online dating profile. I hope there's going to be lots of profile re-editing, lots of photo shuffling and lots of first messages sent as a result of listening to this tonight. If you're not already a member of the Match community, you will get the chance to join later. And if you are a member of the Match community, I can say that a full recording of this session is going to be available as a video on demand coming up very soon. We did get a lot of questions today and before this session as well. So I also have to say, if I didn't get the opportunity to answer your questions today, I want to reassure you that myself and the whole team at Match, we listen and take on board every single question that comes in. So even if we didn't give you a direct response today, you may well find that your question becomes the theme of a future live coaching session. And we are really hoping to host another one, COVID-19 permitting, towards the end of November. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And before we leave for the day, I've got to announce a couple of winners. So congrats. The first winner, who is a Match member, so you are going to win access to my online home study course Unite, is Katie, who's 43 years old. So well done, Katie. And the non-Match member who's suddenly going to become a Match member, because you're going to get 6 months free membership, is MacD, who's 39 years old. So thank you, Katie and MacD, and for everybody for watching this evening. And I will see you again in November.